Eve Gibney, welcome to the Honest to God podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you are very, very welcome. And I want to start off because this story sounds like it should be ITV's latest blockbuster drama. But I am very aware that this has been your life. Mm-hmm. And to start out, we know each other.
Yeah.
We used to work together.
Yep.
And as I was just explaining to Claire, you are a nurse and I used to work in comms for the NHS, and I put you forward for a nursing award, and we had this amazing train journey down to London, and on the way back you told me this story and my jaw was just on the floor the whole time. And because this podcast is about honesty, and because you've written a book about your experience, Face of a Bigamist, which has been out for, there we go. For our viewers, here's Eve, Face of a Bigamist, which is that cover is amazing.
The illustrations are lovely. It's really good.
The cover's by PJ Bruce, and she's a recent art graduate graduated from Manchester. And basically, the image here at the back, the first image that you see, is the bigamist's image from when he was leaving court, having been charged with bigamy. And then from that image, she's explored by doing all the other sort of the distorted images, etc. It's the many faces of the bigamist. Yeah, but really it's his face, because he's just got all these different characters, personalities, appearances, but still from that very one face.
What is a bigamist?
Okay. Good question. Good question. Producer Jacob is very, he's
too stupid to understand this.
So, bigamy is actually quite an unusual crime. But a bigamist is somebody who marries somebody else while still married to someone. So basically, without divorcing somebody, they marry somebody else. And while you can do that in some countries overseas and then bring a second or third wife over to the UK legally, if polygamy, where you marry more than one person, is legal in the country where you've married, it's fine. But in the UK, bigamy is illegal and carries a prison sentence of up to 7 years. Wow. Yeah, and actually in the book... there's a criminal historian, David Cox, and there's a little, about a page of information about the historical aspect of bigamy. And in the 1800s, bigamy was a hanging offence. Yeah.
Wow.
But now it carries 7 years. Yeah.
Jesus.
Because it ruins lives.
Well, it's a crime against not only... It's a crime against morality, really, and values, I suppose, as well as being a crime against the family. And I think it's a very underrated crime. I don't think people realise that there's the whole sensationalism of bigamy, because, it's about deceit, betrayal, somebody having an affair and then they marry somebody else. And it can be very sort of salacious. And I think that's what picks up. That's why the headlines, certainly when he got charged with bigamy, it was in the media around the world. It was just online media around the world, this story. And I suppose also because I discovered it, as you know, on Facebook. So there was that element of social media too. But so there's all this sensationalism of it, but nobody really looks at the impact that it has on the family that's been affected.
Well, I would, if it's okay with you, I would like to explore that today. But I wanted to ask you permission first, because I think it's really important. If we're going to... I'm very aware that telling a story like this opens up old wounds, and I just want to make sure that you're okay with that.
Yeah,
first of
absolutely. Because I talk about it very honestly in the book. Yeah. Because I do want the book to be a sort of platform, really, for discussion. So it's great that you've invited me on here, because I think it challenges a lot of people's sort of stereotypes, perceptions of who these men are who do these sort of things, and the women that they do it to. And I don't think people really expect sort of strong, independent, professional women to be the victims of bigamy.
That's interesting you just said that, because Claire's never met you before, and we were chatting in the car, and how did I describe Yvonne? I said she's strong, didn't I?
Yes, a very strong woman, strong character.
And I said...
And then you said you saw something different in her when she told the story.
Yeah. I think actually it made it harder to hear, because you are somebody who is strong and independent and takes no shit and speaks her mind, and that's what I love and respect about you. When you told me this story on the train, I think that was harder to hear
Yeah.
than somebody who might be a bit more like me, Claire, and cry about things that happen. So yeah, I wanted to say thank you for coming on and sharing this story with us. And for those people who are listening audio only, you've brought your friend Vicky. Hi, Vicky.
Hi.
Vicky Nolan, who is part of this story and just so happened coincidentally to be in the area for this recording. So thank you very much, Vicky, for joining us as well.
Welcome, thank you.
So
I'm going into my spiritual piece here because you mentioned something about the story before about you being in Oman when you were there, and then here for this podcast. It's like you two keep coming together. Like,
Yeah.
when it's needed.
when it's needed. Well, Eve, take us right back. Let's talk. What's his name?
So his name is Maurice Gibney.
And I know you refer to him in the book as M.
Yeah, I refer to him in the book as M. I refer to him as Maurice up until the point we get married.
Yeah.
And then I refer to him as M, because what I realised was, and what comes out as you read further through the book, is the fact that I never knew who this man was. I thought I knew the person that I married. But by the time you get to chapter 20, it's quite obvious that I did not know this man who I married. And in fact, he was almost an imposter, if you like, because I had his name. I had the details that I thought I knew about him, from this man that I loved sort of unconditionally. I thought I knew this man inside out, but I didn't. I didn't know who this man was at all. And I still don't know who is the real Maurice Gibney. Is he the man that married this other woman bigamously? Is he the man that I subsequently discovered had many, many extramarital relationships and affairs, etc. He was just not the person that I thought he was. And therefore, I stopped referring to him by name. And also, to be honest, I didn't want to say his name anymore. So I've just called him M in the book.
Do you want to call him M in this?
I don't mind, we can call
Yeah.
him M.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Tell us how you met him.
So, as you said, I'm a nurse, and I worked and studied a lot in tropical medicine, travel medicine. I'd worked in Southern Africa for a long time, and then came back to London, where I'm originally from, and joined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office as a nursing officer, and I was posted out to Lagos, Nigeria. And I met him within a week of arriving. He had also just arrived in the country, was working for an Italian construction company. So we met and we had this whirlwind, wonderful romance. And we were married sort of 3 months later.
Wow.
Yeah.
3 months.
We literally just swept you off your feet.
Yeah. And it was interesting, Claire, you said about putting your spiritualist head on, because I met him... I think it was like a week after I arrived, and the Canadian embassy used to open up its social club, because you moved in very sort of expat sort of circles, being with the British High Commission. And so I met this other woman called Kathy, who came from Liverpool. And she was the other sort of misfit. Neither of us were really diplomatic material.
Yes.
I went out as a single parent with my 4-year-old son. She came out as a single woman, and we hooked up. And she got invited to the Canadian club by a Danish diplomat, Kathy is very attractive, so often got lots of invitations. So we picked this one, or we'll go with this guy to this Canadian club. And that's where I met him. I met him there. And we both looked across the room at each other, and I thought, I know him. Where do I know him from? And he looked at me, and that was the opening line, like, do we know each other?
Yeah.
But we didn't. I'd never been to Liverpool.
Yeah.
As a Londoner, I'd never go north. And,
That's too cold. It's raining.
And how long have you lived in the north for now?
20 years.
Glad you changed your mind. So you get married. Where did you get married? Did you get married out there?
No, we got married in Scotland. So
In a
we came
castle,
back
wasn't
to
it?
get married. Yeah, in a castle outside of Gretna, just outside of Gretna Green.
How did you?
Yeah.
Why did you get married there?
It would have been a bit difficult to get married in Nigeria, and because we didn't have much leave, we only had very limited time. And in Scotland in those days, you could get married with 14 days notice.
Yeah.
So we chose Scotland, and it was just him and I. One of my closest friends was my a male friend. He was my matron of honour, and his ex-fiancée, who was also his best friend, she was his best man. and
Wow.
and their partners, and that was it. So there was 6 of us.
And how was it in the early days?
It was, well, if you have this whirlwind romance, you fall in love with somebody who you're sure you have known before. And Kathy had said, you must have known each other in a previous life. I didn't quite think that, but there was obviously a connection,
Yeah.
And so it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And then we had my youngest son, Seb, 3 years later. So, yeah. And at that point, his daughter, who is the same age as my eldest son, they're only 3 weeks apart, and she was living with us. So it felt like our family was complete, and it was, as Vicky will know, because Vicky's lived abroad for how many years?
36.
36 years, yes. So you have a wonderful lifestyle, don't you? Yeah. Obviously, depending where you live, but you have this wonderful sort of expatriate lifestyle. The weather's beautiful. It's very sociable. You could be out every night. You've got this family. It was perfect. It was perfect.
You said here the vows or the reading that was at your wedding, and this is a part of the book. It was talked about, give your hearts, but not in each other's keeping.
Yeah.
Stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadows. And then I'm quoting from the book here. You say these thoughts perfectly summed up the type of marriage we wanted: to be together, but to maintain our independence; to love each other, but to have space in that love; to have our own opinions, be ourselves, and retain our identities as individuals as well as a couple.
Yeah.
And I know that we've talked about this before. Would you class it as a long distance marriage at times?
Yeah, at times it was, because we never always lived together because our careers took us in different directions sometimes. And it might just have been that we saw each other every weekend. But at other times we were apart for 6 weeks, and then he'd be home for 2 or 3 weeks. And that, I think, if you're not familiar with the sort of expat lifestyle, and that is very much the way a lot of couples operate, and operate for years and years. And that is, and to us, it's, it suited us. It might not work for everybody, but it suited us.
Yeah.
And it suited us because I believed that, we trusted each other. We trusted each other. We loved each other. It worked for us. I never had any reason to doubt him. I really didn't have any reason to doubt him until those later years, until Oman. Then I had reason to doubt. Then something wasn't quite right.
So talk to us about Oman. When was this?
So he went to Oman in 2011.
So can I just ask
Sure.
you were based in Nigeria?
So no, we'd at that point
We'd met in Nigeria.
We'd met in Nigeria.
Married in Scotland.
Married in Scotland, went back to Nigeria, stayed in Lagos for, I think, close to 7 years. Came back home for about 18 months, and then went back to Nigeria, to a different location, to this Bonny Island, which was offshore. That's where I met Vicky, and stayed there for about 3 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I came back with our youngest son, because the other two were 16 and doing, GCSEs and things. So I came back. He stayed, but in another location in Nigeria. And then from there, did a short stint in Japan for just a couple of months, and then went to work in France, which was fantastic because we would go out every school holiday. It was in the Côte d'Azur in Nice. So we would go out every holiday. I would go over for weekends. Otherwise he would be back every weekend. Yeah. So it was really like, you might find some couples, one partner works in London, one's in Liverpool, come back at weekends. It was the same. It was France and England,
And totally understand that, because I think we did have a relationship where Mark worked away quite a lot, so you you just get used to it.
You get used to it.
Part of life.
Exactly.
So you don't miss anything really, because you look forward to the weekends and stuff.
Yeah, I think you actually have better quality time together because you value it more. But also for us, and this was something that so many people would comment on all the time, was that my phone was never out of my hand because he would be texting me continuously and I would be texting him. And every morning when he wasn't there, I woke up to a phone call from him. And if he couldn't ring, there was always an email waiting for me. Ring me at this time, I would ring. We were in constant contact. I mean, sometimes we might have texted each other 30 times during the day. You know, sometimes you got to the point of thinking, oh, I haven't got time for you.
What kind of messages? When you say like
just
me and
every
Sean,
day.
it's can you get milk? Have the dog's got worming tablets.
Yeah.
It's very rare that there's a nice, do you know what, I really love you. Like that probably happens twice a year. The rest of the time it's, or some shitey sin on Lab Bible that he's sharing. Like, there's nothing lovey-dovey or anything. Would you say that communication was quite romantic?
Yeah, very often. And in fact, and again, I think this is mentioned in the book, when I was still working at the High Commission in Lagos, and so this might have been like 3, 4, maybe 5 years after we'd married, and he went to work on the original building on this Bonny Island where we ended up living. And he went to work out there and would only come back, would go away for 10 days, come back for 3 or 4 days. And the phone system in Nigeria was very poor because there's sort of quite poor infrastructure in some places, and certainly there because they were working and building on this project. So the phones often didn't work, etc. But the fax worked. And every morning without fail, I would arrive at the High Commission at 8 o'clock. He would have been in work at 7:30 and a fax would be there waiting for me. And the fax operator, Mr. Musa, would come to my office. Here it is, you know, the everyday fax. Sometimes the fax was covered with hearts or pictures that he'd drawn. And it was just the most romantic thing. And that carried on, not faxing, but always. And every day, I mean, you said, what would we text about? Nonsense sometimes, just nonsense. You know, oh, I did this, I saw that. Oh, I've been in a meeting. Oh, I'm really anything. Anything. Yeah, just anything.
How would you describe the relationship? So what were you like in the marriage? And in addition to him being quite, like you said, romantic and full on with communication, what was he like?
I think we were very, very similar in that way, you know. Yeah, very similar.
Well matched.
Yeah, very different, but very well matched in a lot of ways.
Vicky, I'm going to ask you, what were they like?
Well, I'm glad you've asked me, actually, because I've been done. I mean, my husband's birthday was in October, and very traditionally as expats, especially expat mothers, in the summer months, it's normally hot, steamy, you'd pile back to the UK or your home country, reconnect with families, build the relationships with your children and their grandparents, and then go back for the school year in September. So my husband's birthday was in October, so we always had an annual party. And it was great because everybody's back on island or back whichever location you're living in, and that's what we used to do. And we always themed it, of course. It had to be 70s or 80s because we love the music. And one of my first and best memories of Eve and Morris was them coming to one of these parties dressed as punks. Eve looked amazing in her bin bag. And, you know, but even Morris, the effort, the detail, he was actually a very artistic and very detailed person. And, you know, the chains and you know, all sorts of things. So they did, but they danced together all night. They, you know, I can't tell you how together this, without being nauseating. They were the strongest, most together couple. And that was really enduring. Honestly,
Couple goals, yeah?
I just can't tell you. I mean, they were the couple we all aspired to be like. While we were all bickering about ordinary rubbish day to day, they didn't. They were mature, they were grown up, they'd got it right. And so, I mean, you know, when some years later all of this kind of unravelled and transpired, it was like, don't be ridiculous.
Yeah.
You found it hard to believe.
Really. And he was very, very moralistic, incredibly, to the extent that he didn't rate people he worked with. They weren't as good as he was. They weren't as detailed. Their work wasn't as exact. You know, he had no time for the men. There were a lot of married men, unfortunately, that messed around. Where you've got gas and oil, you get different situations in these locations. And a lot of men messed around. You know, he had no time for people like that. So again, that reinforced your respect for him as a moralistic, respectful, supportive man. And it was,
Shock
talk about
waves
multi-layered
through families
life.
and friends.
Yeah.
though,
It
wasn't
was incredible,
Absolutely.
you know. So yeah, it's just not them, never them. It was never going to be them.
But it was.
Yeah, it was.
It was.
It was.
Where did it start to maybe not be great?
So as I say, he went to Oman in latter half of 2011. And it started towards the end of that year. He didn't want to go. And we'd said, we'll go. And that would be like your last stint overseas. And then he was going to look for a job at home, because we really felt like, okay, we've reached a point now where, you know, we want to be,
settle.
we want to be all together sort of
Because
thing.
the older kids are 16 at this point.
Yeah.
How old's
yeah.
Seb at this point?
Seb is, don't embarrass me by making me
Sorry.
work out how old he was.
What year was he born?
He was born 98, so he was 13.
He was like 13.
Same as you, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm 23. I was born 98.
Yeah, okay, so at that
Same age as
time he was 13.
producer Jacob. But yeah, back in 10 years ago, 13.
Yeah, so he
Right.
was 13. Yeah, 12 or 13. So anyway, he went, and then that's when things started to change. I mean, I'd gone out to Oman a couple of times. Seb and I went out that Christmas 2011, and he had to go to work in the desert for a couple of days when we were there. But we knew that was going to happen. He'd forewarned us, but it just happened. It was over the Christmas period.
Oh, like what? Christmas Day?
Yeah, it was Christmas like 23rd through to the 26th or something, or 24th. It was going to be 24th through to the 26th. But then he had to go a day early. Then he couldn't come back. So it actually meant we were by ourselves in Oman for like 5 days or something while he was working in the desert, also having a pretty difficult time. But of course, without wanting to put a spoiler on the book, I won't say where he really was, but he was not in the desert, let's
Where
say.
he said he was.
Yeah, he wasn't where he said he was.
Did you have any inclination?
No, because he was emailing me from the desert. You know, he was trying to get through on the phone from the desert. He came back. He'd had this really difficult time in the desert, you know, which then, of course, made me feel like, oh, don't complain the fact that you've been here. Poor him. You know, we've come out to see him and he's stuck in the desert, you know. But of course he wasn't in the desert, as we now know. So that's when, and then things started to change from then, because whereas he should have been home every sort of 7 or 8 weeks, his trips would be delayed. And when he came home, he was being called back on urgent business and the trips were getting shorter. We would book to go out in the school holidays, our trips. Oh, no, you can't come. Sorry, I've got to fly here. I've got to go there. And I knew something wasn't right. And when he was coming home, he wasn't 100% present. Something was changing. And he blamed it on his mental health and said he was very depressed out there. He didn't want to be there, but there wasn't any other jobs available. And painted this whole picture, and he knew if he played the depression card with me, that would make me extend the boundaries of what was acceptable behaviour. Whereas normally I would say, no, sorry, I don't think that's acceptable. Oh, you're depressed. Okay, I will indulge you. And it's like, okay, if you feel you need to do this, do it, etc. And he abused that. He abused that trust.
Because of course, as a medical,
as
a medical professional, that's something you're well aware of.
Yeah,
the effects
absolutely.
of depression. You know, you're helping
absolutely.
people all the time who are diagnosed with depression.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And he's going to know that. He's going to know. A nurse is a care. To be a nurse, you've got to be caring, right? He's going to know that you've got that caring nature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's what I mean by the fact that was abused. My trust in him, you know, and my care and my love for him was abused to enable him to live this duplicitous life that he had already begun to live in Oman.
How long then did that, when that happened and you started noticing the difference, how long did that go on? And did you have any inkling inside of he's behaving differently?
Yeah.
Has he got someone else, or did it just not even?
No, his behaviour became a bit extreme in some ways, and was very much not like him. And I mooted the idea. Could there be somebody else? And I asked him several times outright, and he denied it. And even a friend said to me, do you think there's another woman? And do you think that's why? And I said, I really don't think so, because I think he's so depressed. I can't see how anyone with that level of emotional sort of, trauma that he was going through with the depression would be able to manage being in a relationship with somebody else, and the deceit that you would have to portray to enable that and everything else. So it had entered my mind, but I'd rejected it because it just didn't seem possible. And it wasn't who I believed he was.
Yeah.
But of course, he was that person.
Was he still messaging you as much in this time?
Not quite as much, but still in a way. I'll give you an example. So the day that they married, bigamistly, he was messaging me about the fact that he'd decided that he was going to get his sheets laundered from now on, and his shirts, instead of putting them in the washing machine, because, there was issues with drying them in the apartment. There was nowhere to hang your washing. And he always had a problem with sweating. He always sweated profusely. So he always wore like white sloppy Joe vests under his shirts and things. And this was the conversation. And I think we had something like 13 texts between us about, getting your sheets laundered and your shirts laundered, as opposed to washing them with nowhere to dry, to dry them in the apartment. And this was the banter.
Just like
the
a
night
normal
before
conversation
he had the bigamous wedding. This was the banter that was going on between us. That was completely normal, completely normal. And then he said to me the next day, the day of the wedding, that he had a really bad headache. So, if he doesn't get back in touch the rest of the day, don't worry. I really don't feel well. I'm going to bed. And the Wi-Fi in the apartment, of course, where I believed he was still living, in the apartment that I was familiar with. But of course, he wasn't living there. He'd been living with the bigamous bride for some time before, because they'd been engaged for what? So 8, 9, 10. They'd already been engaged for 10 months while he was still coming home to us in a normal family relationship. And he'd been living with her for that period of time. But of course, I still believed he was living in the apartment. Yeah. So he said, the Wi-Fi in the apartment, it's really bad, which I did. So if you don't hear from me, don't worry. Really bad headache, couple of paracetamol, going to bed. Not telling me, of course, I'm actually going off to get married. And then the next day, back online, sending messages. Guess where I am? I'm back in Starbucks, because he always went to Starbucks on the Corniche, having cycled down to the Corniche, stopped in Starbucks for his cappuccino and his low sugar apple cake.
So like clockwork, like routine.
Yeah. And that was the message I got on the day after his wedding.
Can I ask, did she know he was married, or was it a complete shot? Is this?
I was just about to say, in order to tell this story properly, we've actually got to fast forward to then rewind, haven't we?
Yes, yeah.
So pause that question,
Okay,
Claire.
right? I'm like,
Because we're gonna have to press the fast forward button a little bit, and I'm lucky because I've been privileged to this story before, but I don't know whether we have to fast forward to Vicky. Or you getting a bit twitchy and thinking, hang on, what's happened? Do we need to fast forward to Facebook, or to the point where Vicky finds
I think maybe the
out?
point where Vicky meets them in the hotel. So so we put it into context. At this point, so they'd got married March 2013. He'd been home. So now fast forward, rewind, etc. Now I'm trying to work it all out. So we'd reached this point with him toing and froing from Oman, where I really had got fed up with this behaviour, and he was unwilling to do anything about the depression. And he was pulling us all down. All of us were being drawn in because of his behaviour. And I was constantly worried, constantly stressed. And the fact that he wouldn't do anything about it, I felt I had to make a decision. What was in the best interest of me and the children, or him being allowed to continue on this route that he was going on? So, and then there was a series of events that happened, very violent series of events. that made me realise that I had no other option. And I went to a solicitor to start the divorce proceedings. And it was while I was going through those proceedings that I tried to keep the relationship as amicable as possible. And that's when he was, just to put it into context, that's when he was messaging me, because he then got married 2 months later. We weren't even legally separated. I'd only gone to a solicitor at the end of January, and they married in March. And it was such a big, lavish, extravagant wedding that it had been planned. Well, we know it had been planned from the year before. We have evidence of that. And then it was some months later that you saw them at the hotel, didn't you? So
Yeah, well, my husband was in gas and oil. He used to work for an oil company. And we'd been in Qatar for years, and we'd loved Oman. We'd holidayed there, loved it. And we were lucky enough that a job came up. So over to Oman we moved. And again, in touch with Eve. Now, Eve hadn't told us at this stage. Eve was also very close to my husband. So we were friends together, not just as girlfriends. But she hadn't mentioned... She'd mentioned that she was worried about Morris and his depression, but she hadn't mentioned anything else. So she said, I'm so pleased you're moving over there. Here's all Morris's contact details. We moved over in the August, I think. And we did a couple of times contact Morris and arranged to meet. And I don't know how many times, but quite a few, I'm sorry, I've got to go into the desert.
Yes.
Well, it became a standing joke, Morris of Arabia. Because I'm what's this desert he's going into? I thought, well, this is a bit odd. And again, the job he did for the company he did, it was a bit odd, but who we did. So we didn't meet up with him. We didn't see him. And Muscat is a very small place as expats. There aren't a huge amount of places to go. So you run into people. Well, we didn't. We didn't run into Morris at all. And it was odd. It was odd, without any doubt. Well, one evening we went to the Intercon bar, the sports bar, which incidentally I didn't like very much at all. But we went to this Intercon bar with a couple of our pals. I think it was the October time, something like that. And huge bar, square bar in the middle, and areas around it. And my husband and I at the time smoked, and there was a smoking room, and it was one-way glass. We went in with our friends, sat in a table, and I'm not joking. We are talking that from here to the corner of the room, so 10 or 12 feet away, is Morris sitting at a bar on a bar stool with a woman on their own, nobody else around them. And we were a bit. There's Morris. And the two friends we were with had also met them, before as well. Or met him,
When you say
met him before.
they met Morris before, not Morris
So,
and Eve
and
together.
I don't know.
they'd met Morris.
They'd met Morris. That Christmas,
They'd
that
met us two
disastrous
together.
Christmas, yeah. So, and I don't know, I cannot explain to this day why we didn't go up and say, hey, Morris, our husbands played golf together. They were really good friends. And we just didn't go up. I mean, there was a kind of small acknowledgement. He didn't leave the bar, but neither did we go up. And I don't know why, because there was no evidence whatsoever of any romance between them. I mean, it was... But what I did do is go to the smoking room quite often.
Because it was one-way glass.
Because it was one-way glass.
Yeah.
And I'm not joking. I then was feet away from them. And I stood there. I can't tell you. I could not figure out. There was... I just can't... to this day... I saw no evidence of a romance or a close friendship or anything. I really didn't. And when we came home, Sam said to me, he said, well, you're obviously going to be on the phone to Yvonne tonight. And I didn't that night. I did wait a couple of days because I wasn't sure what I'd seen anyway. But I did eventually phone Yvonne and I said, look, I've just, we saw Morris. Now again, I'll short rewind. So whilst we were in the bar, as I say, he didn't leave. Mm-hmm. So this is over a period of 2 or 3 hours. He didn't leave. And my husband went to the gentleman's, the men's room, and it was out of the bar and down a corridor. And he was gone some time. And when he came back, or afterwards perhaps, I don't know, he had said, as he came out of the men's room, Morris was walking down the corridor, and he'd stopped and said, oh, hi, how are you? And they had some inane little conversation about the golf courses there and how much they cost. And then he had said to Sam, what happens in Oman stays in Oman. And God love my husband. He just went, I don't think so, Morris.
After he'd been the person who'd had such an opinion on other people in the past.
Well, exactly. And that was the biggest shock. But I think as well, that was probably that kind of, right, okay, you saw no evidence. They weren't particularly they weren't tactile at all. But why would you say that?
Yeah.
So I did think, I mean, I phoned. It was about 2 days later.
Yeah,
I phoned
you rang
Eve
me.
and I said, I've got it. And I was honest and I said, but I saw no evidence. I don't know what we saw.
I always remember you saying to me, look, I really don't think it's romantic because, and of course at this point we had actually separated. So I wasn't interested in whether he was having a romance or not, to be honest. But our final divorce hearing was 3 months away. And I didn't want what I was concerned about was the potential influence of another woman in his life over the financial outcome of our divorce. That's what was worrying me because I had the children to think about. And Vicky, you said to me, I'm convinced there's no romance because if it was the two of you sitting together, you'd be touching each other all the time, laughing, flirting with each other. And she said to me that they sat just facing each other. They looked bored in each other's company. They weren't touching each other. There was no feet on each other's stool, even though they were on. And I remember it distinctly because I felt reassured by that. And of course, at that point, they were still newlyweds. They'd already been married. They were married, 6 months at that point when Vicky and Sam saw them in the bar. And we've asked ourselves the question so many times, haven't we? Yeah. What would they have done if Vicky would have gone over and said, "Oh, hello, I'm one of Eve's really good friends. Who are you?" And this woman would have said, "Well, I'm his wife." And she would have said, "Well, you're not." I mean, a whole load of scenarios have gone through our heads as to, one, what was so odd that night that you didn't go over to say hello? And also, how could he have fronted it out? He stayed in that bar, didn't he?
He stayed there. He
for
didn't run away.
a couple of hours after having had a conversation with Sam.
So even though those words weren't uttered, "I'm his wife," or "she's my wife," or "this is the wife," those words were uttered at another point in this story.
Another point in the story, indeed.
Tell us how you found out.
So, the Christmas 2011, he'd been in the desert. Seb and I were in Muscat on our own. Christmas 2012, when I was en route to the airport to pick him up, he rung to say that he wasn't coming home. And he wasn't coming home because his so-called depression had got so bad, he'd spoken to a counsellor and had been advised not to come home, etc. So he wasn't coming. So we had a conversation, okay, he would come after Christmas. And of course, we were really disappointed. But he ended up not coming after Christmas, but coming later in the January, towards the end of January. We had this massive bust-up. And he left the family home. And that was the last time he was ever in our family home. It was the last time that Seb saw his father, January 2013. And I got quite worried because we didn't know what had happened to him. But he'd hired a car from the airport to drive home on that trip. And so after a couple of days of him not responding to text or anything, and of course at that point, me still believing that he had this serious, mental health issues, I was really worried. So I rung the car hire company at the airport and I explained the situation. And I spoke to this woman who I am to this day eternally grateful to, because without her telling me what she told me, I would never have discovered the bigamy. And she told me that he'd brought the car back the day after he'd left the house. He'd gone back to Oman, whatever. And we had this conversation and she said, of course, I remembered him because I gave him the car when he came back at Christmas. And when he was here at Christmas, he'd emailed ahead to say he wanted the most expensive, exclusive car in the fleet. And this time he'd said, he just wants the cheapest one just to get him from A to B. And she said, so I remembered that and I had a conversation with him. And then she told me where he'd registered the car to when he was here at Christmas. And I said, what? I thought, well, you can't say he wasn't here at Christmas. But of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, he wasn't here. He was in Oman. He was too depressed to come home. So she gave me this address and I looked the address up and it was somewhere near Birmingham. And I went on 192.com and I discovered he lived there, a middle-aged couple with 2 teenage children. And very, reluctantly, I dialed the number because I thought, well, he must be having an affair with this woman. Dialed the number, it went to voicemail, and it named the woman who lived there and her husband. And I thought, well, if you weren't with the husband, he wouldn't be on your voicemail. You wouldn't be leave a message for him. And then I researched both of them, and I found out that the husband worked for a company that had offices in Muscat. So in my mind, I've thought, okay, he must have hired the car on behalf of this guy and their friends from Muscat. And I tried to, because, when you don't want to think about or rationalise something that, one, you don't know the answer to, or one, you don't want to consider as being an option, for me, I left it. And I thought, okay, you can bank that. The woman lives there with the husband. There's Muscat is the connection. He's not having an affair. And for the time being, I'll bank that somewhere. And I didn't want to say anything to him because I thought this is something I have to keep to myself. So we then fast forward to the following year when the February is our final divorce hearing. This is early February. And I now wanted to tie up loose ends. And I thought, I still don't know the truth about these people and the car hire. So I rung the number. And I didn't pre-plan it. I didn't think about anything in what I was going to say. A man answered the phone and I winged it. And I just said, I'm calling from this hire company, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Maurice Gibney hired a car from us last Christmas. The car has been involved in an incident, and the police have now taken the car. And because of data protection, the police want to know everyone who's hired this car. Nothing to do with Mr. Gibney, the incident, but I just want him to know that the police have his details as having hired this car. And it was registered to this address, right? And so I have this conversation with this man. I don't know where it came from. And I had this conversation with this man who told me that, yes, he stays there every time he comes home from Oman. And that's right. He was there at Christmas. He did register the car. And of course, all of this is a shock to me, even though this is a year on. And then I said to him, so could you just tell me who you are and what your relationship is? Because I'll try. And I pretended that I tried to contact Maurice and he hadn't been responding. And I said, I'm going to try one more time. And I would like to say that I've spoken to you. So could you just tell me your name, even though I knew it, and your relationship to him? So he gave me his name and he said, and I am his brother-in-law. And I repeated it because I wasn't sure that's what he'd said. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And I couldn't make head nor tail of it because how is he his brother-in-law? What does that mean? That means he must be married to his sister. And he can't be married to his sister because he's still married to me. And I remember I rung my brother and I said, what's the definition of brother-in-law?
Yeah, it's trying to get round it.
So he told, and I thought, no, it doesn't make sense. So I rung my friend who had been with me throughout all of this and she came round and I told her and I said, I'm now going to ring them back. And I'm going to say who I am and I'm going to ask for an explanation. And so my friend was poised, kitchen table, notepad, pen, and I said, I'm going to repeat everything they say. You write it down. So I rung back and the woman answered this time. And I said, I've received a call from car hire company about a car Maurice Gibney hired to your address. And the lady said that she had spoken to Maurice Gibney's brother-in-law. But that doesn't make sense. So how is Maurice Gibney this man's brother-in-law? And she never asked me any questions. She just said, well, he's married to my sister. And how many times I said it, I don't recall. It was like, married to your sister. And she said, yes, he's married to my sister. And I said, he's married to your sister. And my friend's going, he's married to the sister. Just going round in circles. And then the woman said to me, but Maurice doesn't have any sisters called Eve. And I said, I never said I was Maurice's sister. And she said, well, who are you? And I said, I'm Maurice's wife. And then it was her turn. She said, Maurice's wife. Maurice's wife. And it was like, oh. And anyway, then this woman just sort of fell to pieces, didn't know what to say. And she said she'd call me back, put the phone down. And I mean, we didn't know we just couldn't understand it at all. She never rung me back. So I called her back and the man answered this time. And he said, I'm really sorry, we can't speak to you. I'm really sorry. Sounded very, very upset. Very upset. And And I just couldn't work it out. It made no sense. Who was this woman that he'd married? Who are these people near Birmingham? When had he got married? Nothing made any sense at all. So I thought, okay, I will go to my mother-in-law's house in Liverpool. So I rang my eldest son, Josh, because I wasn't capable of going on my own. And Josh and I went to my mother-in-law's. And that scenario is described in a chapter in the book. And basically, we went there and I asked her, has he married somebody else? And she denied all knowledge, absolutely denied all knowledge of him remarrying this woman. And in fact, threw Josh and I out of the house, told me, why am I there causing trouble, causing problems, threw us out of the house, told us she never wanted to see us again. And then when I did discover the bigamy, tell me who was walking my husband down the aisle at his bigamous wedding? Who gave my husband away? My mother-in-law.
Oh my God.
Bitch.
So she was.
Sorry.
Producer Jacob just said bitch then, if you didn't hear that. You're so engrossed in this story, aren't you, darling?
I'm sweating.
I'm sweating as well.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
these day and age, right? Social media is a place where a lot of people find out things.
Yes.
And
yeah.
you got the answers on social media, didn't you?
I did. So we came away, and as we left the house, Josh said to me, Mum, he's married somebody, because otherwise she would have said, what are you talking about? Like anybody would, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I realised. And then we knew for sure that's what he'd done. But we didn't know who it was he'd married. So this is, as I say, this is around, I think it was 11 days before the final divorce hearing. So he was due back in England. We were going to court. So I didn't know what to do. And I went onto Facebook and I looked at her family's, the people near Birmingham. I looked at their Facebook profiles. I couldn't find anything. And I just didn't know what to do. I said to my solicitor, I want to drive there to their house and confront them. Not confrontationally sort of thing, but I just want to go
Clear
and talk
stuff
to
up.
them.
Yeah.
Because the day after I'd been to my mother-in-law's, I rung them back. And I got a torrent of abuse from them down the phone. They were so abusive to me and so unpleasant to me. They called me all sorts of names. They told me never to call them again. So I knew they wouldn't pick up if I called again. So I called again and I gave them my solicitor's details. And I said, you have to understand, this is a very serious issue. It's shocking to you. It's very shocking to me. This is the details of my solicitor. Maurice and I are going through a divorce at the moment. We are not divorced, and you need to understand that. Name of solicitor, phone number, email, address, explained my solicitor is part of a chain across the Northwest. Please don't call them until you've looked online and confirmed that all of this information about the solicitor is legitimate. So I didn't have a solicitor, in this crazy story that apparently I'd made up. But they never ever called. And I never understood that. I never understood why they never contacted my solicitor. And then it was, but my own solicitor said, no, you can't go there. You can't go and visit them, whatever. We just have to wait and see what happens. And then I woke up in the middle of the night. And again, from what you said about a spiritual thing, I'm very much a believer in spiritualism and things. And I had this voice giving me a name. And it was like a sort of shortened version of the name of their daughter, these people near Birmingham. And I went onto Facebook and there this daughter was. And so I thought, okay, teenager, been at a wedding. She is going to have a post about a wedding. So I went through months and months and months of comments on clothes and boys and netball competitions and all of this stuff. And then I saw, happy birthday to the best auntie in the world, Suzanne Prudhoe. And I clicked on this Suzanne Prudhoe name and it took me to the Facebook page of Suzanne Prudhoe. Her profile picture, her blonde hair in a chignon, tiara, little bolero, white full bridal gown, bouquet of roses, man's hand around her waist. She's looking up adoringly into the eyes of the bridegroom, and the bridegroom was my husband. So I knew who he'd married.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what?
Big breath. Hang on. Jacob's just taken a deep.
Exhale.
Have you got goosies? I've got goosies as well.
Yeah. But I knew it was him. But I looked at this picture and it had the name of the photographer's website on the picture. And I thought, what? It really looks like him. But of course it can't be.
Yeah.
Unless he's modelled with this woman for this photographer. That's what he's done. He's modelled with this woman. Even though I was searching to find proof of his wedding when it was in front of me, I couldn't accept it for what I could see. I was looking for some other reason for it to be there. And I rang a friend of mine, or I messaged her. It was like 6 a.m. or something. And I messaged her, are you up? Yeah, ring me. So anyway, we had this conversation and she had a look and she said, it's him. It's him. And then she said, there's the photographer's website. Let me have a look. Don't you do anything. Let me look. Yeah. And I'll stay on the line. And she gave me a sort of running commentary. And then she said, his family are there. She said, I think it's his mother walking him down the aisle. There's lots and lots of photographs. And she said, it's Muscat. There's palm trees. There's the beach. It's beautiful. It must be Muscat. And she described it all to me. And of course it was. His family were there witnessing his marriage to this other woman in an extraordinary, lavish ceremony that I discovered afterwards because I did a lot of detective work to aid the police with the bigamy charge, and then later on a 4-year battle to get back to court to try to reclaim some of what should have rightly been mine in the divorce settlement, which he had concealed as part of his sort of duplicitous life. Oh no, I've forgotten. What was I
You were talking about the wedding and you knew.
Sorry, yeah. So I could work out, and we had proof from the wedding planner at the Al Bustan Hotel, who later Vicky and I went and met, that the wedding had cost over £50,000. And at the time I was working sort of 3/4 time in a GP practice, and that was more than double my annual salary he had spent on the wedding. He had spent. And as we were still married, not even separated legally, so half of that money was mine. Yeah. So in effect, I paid for half of their bigamous wedding, and no doubt the engagement ring and the wedding ring and everything else. So yeah, just extraordinary.
How did you feel in that moment, getting that confirmation from your friend that not only did it happen, but his family were there as well?
Yeah. That was particularly hurtful to me, the fact that the family were there, because then I had to question, why were they there? What had been said that had enabled them to witness this wedding? What had been said to enable them to cut off contact with me and my sons?
The grandkids.
Exactly. What had happened? And of course, my stepdaughter, who used to live with us and who I had been emailing the week before because she was backpacking around Australia. And she was telling me of her travel plans for the next couple of weeks.
Did she know?
But failed to say, but in between that, I'm going to Oman to be bridesmaid at Dad's wedding.
So she knew?
Yeah. She knew, yeah. But she had been, I later discovered, she also had been told what he'd said that we'd been divorced for several years and had kept it a secret to protect Seb, our youngest son. And that I was crazy. There were various versions that were told to various people basically. Yeah. And this was his power of manipulation and control, not only over me, but as I later discovered over many, many women in his life. And he, in a way, that control was so powerful and so strong that it enabled him to pitch one woman against the other, all to support his double life, basically. So he had told one woman that she mustn't tell me anything about the wedding because he doesn't want me to be upset. I will be devastated to know that he's marrying again. I will be really upset. So it was her role to protect me from this. This was a member of his family. It was her role to protect me. So she must never tell me. Yeah. He told my stepdaughter that well, if she finds out, she's already threatened Suzanne several times. She knows that I've been seeing her. She knows I'm engaged. She's threatened Suzanne. If you tell her about the wedding, she might come out here and try and spoil it. And you wouldn't want that, would you? So he put the responsibility of protecting his fiancée, of the new stepmother, onto his daughter. Yeah. So not to tell me to protect this woman who's now going to be your new stepmother. He told his family we'd been divorced for several years and we hadn't told anybody to protect Seb. Mm-hmm. And now I'd had a sort of breakdown and was refusing to believe that we were divorced because I was so distressed to hear he was marrying someone else. So nobody should have any contact with me. And this is how he played one off against the other.
And let's just take it back a bit. And he's texting you about getting his sheets laundered as well at the same time.
Yes.
Which
On the day he got married.
Which actually kind of leads us back to where we started, to the cover of your book, because you have put pen to paper. You've written the first part of your story in Face of a Bigamist. And for those people listening on audio only, the cover, as producer Jacob described, it looks like a Picasso painting. It's like 3 different faces all merged into one, and the original face is taken from the face of Morris. Because that's who he was. He had very different faces and he was very manipulative and it was about coercive control.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I know that you fought so hard to get justice in the courts. And I know that was an expensive... that was such a use of energy, emotions, finances to get justice, because that's what you deserve is justice.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean,
what gave you the drive to go after that? Because I don't, and obviously I know Gemma said that you're a really strong woman anyway. Was that just in you to go after that, or did you have to really work on yourself to go after it, or was it a given you were going after it? Because I think some women would just, not even just women, because women can be bigamists as well, can't they?
Yeah.
But might just let that go and go, just let it go.
I think it was there was a lot of factors involved. If we just go back to the end of the divorce, when I discovered the bigamy, my solicitor confronted his solicitor and confronted him with the evidence, the pictures of the wedding, the wedding vows, which we'd enlarged. It was clear it was a wedding. He denied it and said it was a ceremony of commitment. So when we got into the divorce court, the judge didn't want to know anything about it. The judge said, this is family law, not criminal law. If he says he hasn't married bigamously, he hasn't married bigamously. And his legal team wouldn't push it, and nor would my legal team. And I was so disappointed in them.
What was the reason for that?
Well, because he had denied it. And so there was, and we had no real concrete proof other than the photographs. But the key thing was that he, the bigamist, had denied it. And so his opinion was more valuable. His comment, his so-called honesty was more valuable than anybody else's. And the judge wouldn't address it. And the judge said, well, if you think he's committed bigamy, then you go to the police and report him, which is exactly what I did the following day. And he was then charged with bigamy. And as I said earlier, I did a lot of detective work to try and uncover things that would be useful for the bigamy case. And they were indeed useful. And it was quite a good feeling to know that I'd helped the police to that degree to be able to charge him. But of course, he got off with a suspended sentence. He got a 6-month suspended sentence for 2 years, went back to Oman and continued to live his life. I mean, Vicky had seen them at a ball. Vicky had seen them in a bar. He was living his life normally. Because of his actions through the divorce, because to cover up his double life, he'd had to alter and falsify bank statements. He had to cover up numerous trips back to the UK that we didn't know about. He had to cover up expenditure, etc. So he'd falsified bank statements. I caught him out. I knew that they were false bank statements. But so he then submitted what he claimed to be true bank statements, which were still false bank statements, but he wasn't penalised for that. And it became my responsibility during the divorce case to go back to court and ask for special permission to challenge him on these fraudulent bank statements. And when you go through a divorce, you use a form called the Form E. And on the Form E, you have to submit all your financial documentation, etc. And it says very clearly on the Form E that if you do not give what they refer to as full and frank disclosure, you can go to prison or you can be fined for contempt of court, for perjury, for fraud. No action was taken against him, even though he subsequently wrote to the court and admitted to fraudulent bank statements. No action was taken against him. And I was outraged at that because, you know, I thought you put your faith and your trust in your solicitors and they guide you through the divorce process and there's a fair and honest outcome. But there wasn't. And all the things that I later discovered, investigating the bigamy, and I ended up going back to Oman, and Vicky and I, like Thelma and Louise, this is all in book 2, folks. Book 2 coming soon. I go back to Oman, and we discover hidden bank accounts, and I also discover the other women that coexisted throughout my marriage, unfortunately. But again, so I could clearly prove he had concealed, I am talking hundreds of thousands of pounds from me in the divorce settlement. Yeah. But I couldn't go back to court because at the time it wasn't possible. You couldn't go back and have your divorce settlement reassessed, even if it had been made on erroneous claims. The law changed in November 2016. I then appointed new solicitors, and it was the team that had set legal precedents by going to the High Court to defend these two women's rights to challenge the divorce settlements, which they could prove had also been made on fraudulent documentation. They set legal precedents. I went with this team. It took us 18 months. And April 2018, I went back to court and I got my divorce settlement set aside. And all I got was his share of the house because that's all I wanted. I didn't want to go down the routes of trying to reclaim the money because I felt if you can steal from your own family and from your own children, then you keep that money. I'm not interested. Keep it. Do whatever you like with it. Just, I don't want it. But I wanted his share of the house because I felt he has no right to the family home, given the fact that he betrayed his family to enable this other lifestyle and for him to marry this woman bigamously. So my motivation for doing all of that was that I never got justice during the divorce case. No one heard my voice. They heard his lying, cheating, bigamous voice over my honest one. And I'd been honest throughout. And I was so devastated by the level of deceit, betrayal, the values of your marriage, the fact that you've believed 100% in this person, loved them unconditionally. And this is what they can do to you with no remorse. He never, ever said sorry. He never asked after the boys. He's never seen them. No interest whatsoever. And I just thought, the courts might let you get away with this, but I am not going to let you get away with this because we're better than this. And I am a victim. I'm a victim of his lies, his deceit, his multiple affairs, his theft, his whatever. I'm a victim of that. But I am a strong woman, but that doesn't mean because I'm strong that I'm affected any less than somebody who is less strong or less independent. I was devastated. I was suffering from depression, from the violent attacks, post-traumatic stress, which I still suffer from. I was in counselling. I was so traumatised, yet still being the sole carer for the children and the sole breadwinner, had a lot of responsibility with the tremendous debt hanging over me because, as I said earlier, all of his false claims and false representation in the divorce hearing, my legal bill was £40,000. I was quoted £2,500 for a divorce. It was £40,000. And my solicitors made it clear that was because of his behaviour, failing to engage, writing letters, constantly threatening to do A, B, C and D that we had to respond to, yet there was no justification. And his legal team were as bad as him, as far as I'm concerned. They only cared about making money. There was no moral or, sense of law or justice about it. And when he got off, when he got off with that 6 months suspended sentence, after I had read my victim personal statement in court, and when the victim personal statement went to the witness care unit and all the other agencies that it goes to before you read it in court, the witness care unit came back to me and said it is the most powerful statement they have ever read. And as such, could like the head of the service come because they wanted to see the impact that it had in the courtroom. And the witness impact statement is a statement that in law informs the judge's sentencing. You describe how the crime has impacted on you, and in this case, my children as well. And that helps the judge to inform the sentence. Well, he got off with 6 months. So the trauma that we had encountered was irrelevant to that judge. He didn't take it into consideration at all. He wasn't interested. It was apparent throughout the whole court proceedings. No one really cared, you know, no one cared. And so I took it upon myself then that, yeah, I'm a victim, but I'm not going to live with that label. I'm going to peel it off. I am a victim, and I can never deny that, but I'm not going to live as a victim. I am going to get the justice that the legal courts and the criminal courts did not give me. One, because I was a female. Two, because I had no money to defend myself and had to rack up huge debts. But I was really fortunate that I had an amazing network of support and friends behind me, that I was in a position to run up massive debts, you know, to take the second case, to take him back to court. That, as I say, we won in April 2018. It cost me £60,000 on top of the 40,000.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was £59,000. And the judge awarded, when she awarded me his share of the house, she also awarded costs against him. So he had to pay my legal costs. But family law has no way of imposing that court order. So it is worthless.
So you didn't get it?
It's worthless. I did get it.
Right.
But I had to go and engage bailiffs, high court enforcement. I had to apply to the banks to freeze his bank account. I had to do all of those things. And again, that was me. Yes. I was able to do it. I had a voice, I had support, etc. A lot of women don't have the support. Yeah. They don't have the time. They don't know where to go. You know, they don't have it. They're not. So it's just so unfair. And that's another thing that I hope the book identifies and creates a narrative around, or stimulates a narrative around, is the iniquities of both family law and criminal law, and how they treat women and how they treat victims of abuse, because we were abused. You know.
You mentioned there that you didn't have a voice at the time. You've just said a split second ago, I had a voice. Your book is your voice now.
Yeah.
You've outlined your story. Your book is your voice, which rounds this off nicely, because I know we could talk forever on this subject.
So me, I love getting in the detail.
Face of a Bigamist is available now by Eve Gibney, currently available on Kindle and paperback. You're going to do an audio version of this. You have to. You've got to do an audio version.
We're in the process of recording it now. So it's available on Amazon, as I've self-published, but it's also available through my website, which is evegibney.com. And Eve is spelt Y-V-E. So YVEGIBNEY.com, and you can order the book through the website. And if you go on the website, please sign up for the newsletter, the email, because we'll keep you posted about the sequel to the book as well, which is the next 4 years that it took to finally get justice.
Eve Gibney and Vicky as well, thank you so much for coming along to Honest to God. We really do appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you.